You pick up your smartphone, tap a piece of glass, and a stranger arrives at your door with a hot meal. You pay for it using invisible digital points that represent hours of your life spent sitting at a desk. You think this frictionless system of buying and selling is the peak of human sophistication. But the real answer is far stranger. Long before the first metal coin was struck, prehistoric humans were engaging in a complex global market that would make a Wall Street trader dizzy. What if the cavemen weren't primitive survivalists at all? What if they were calculating investors trading items you would consider completely worthless? You have been taught a classic myth about the origins of economics. Textbooks tell you that before money, humans used a primitive barter system where a hunter would trade a woolly mammoth leg directly for a flint spearhead. But this neat explanation is entirely fictional. In reality, direct barter is an incredibly inefficient way to survive. If you are starving and have an extra spear, but the person with meat doesn't need a spear, you both die. Why do we believe a story about our ancestors that defies basic logic? Let's look closely at the archaeological record. The anthropologist David Graeber thoroughly investigated ancient communities and found absolutely zero evidence that any pure barter economy ever existed. Instead, prehistoric humans lived in a system of deep, community-wide credit, something closer to an elaborate, long-term system of social debt. Here is what that means in practice. If you killed a large animal, you did not trade pieces of it on the spot for other goods. You gave the meat away. To your group. To your neighbors. To people who had nothing immediate to offer back. And in doing so, you created something far more valuable than an even trade. You created an obligation. A memory. A social debt that the receiver carried, consciously or not, until the day they could return the favor. This system is called reciprocal exchange, and it functioned as the actual currency of prehistoric life. Not goods. Not coins. Memory and obligation. Imagine living in a world where your net worth is tracked entirely by the memory of your neighbors. In a small tribe, your reputation was your bank account. The earliest humans were not bad at economics because they lacked money. They had built an entire economic system that ran on something money cannot fully replicate even today: trust, memory, and relationship. If you were greedy, you were socially bankrupted and left to freeze in the winter. This was a gift economy, a brilliant survival strategy that sustained our species for over 90% of our history. This reciprocal exchange, the social debt, created something money explicitly cannot. It created relationship. Obligation in a gift economy was not a burden. It was the glue that held small societies together, the reason people checked on each other, fed each other during hard seasons, and remembered each other's children's names. Yet, as tribes expanded and encountered strangers, the psychological ledger began to break down. You cannot trust an unwritten promise from someone you will never see again. This is the exact moment that prehistoric humans invented something astonishing. They didn't invent coins, because they didn't have the technology to smelt metal. Instead, they weaponized the concept of scarcity by using rare items found in nature. The archaeologist Dr. Mary Steiner discovered that over 40,000 years ago, early humans began collecting tiny, standardized marine shell beads. They found cowrie shells and other ocean shells in archaeological sites hundreds of miles inland, far from any coastline. These shells were not used for food, and they couldn't be turned into weapons. They required hundreds of hours of intense physical labor to harvest, drill, and polish. Their entire value came from one thing: scarcity combined with universal recognition. Exactly the same two properties that give modern currency its value. Why would a prehistoric human trade life-saving meat for a tiny piece of ocean debris? The answer lies in human psychology. The beads were the world's very first proof-of-work algorithm. By holding a string of polished shells, you were holding physical evidence of wasted time. It proved that someone had invested hours of labor into an object that served no practical survival purpose. Because everyone recognized how difficult they were to make, the shells became a universal translator of value. They allowed a hunter from the mountains to trade with a fisherman from the coast without needing to trust each other. This explains something strange about modern life that economists rarely connect back to its origin. Why does an expensive gift from a stranger feel hollow, while a small, thoughtful gift from someone who knows you feels disproportionately valuable? Because your brain is still running the old reciprocal exchange software. It is still evaluating gifts based on relationship and memory, not market price. A coffee mug made by a friend who remembered your favorite color triggers a completely different psychological response than a coffee mug bought on sale, even if the second one costs more. Prehistoric humans didn't stop at shells. In the Neolithic era, the ultimate high-tech commodity was obsidian, a volcanic glass that could be flaked into razor-sharp hunting knives. The geologist Dr. Colin Renfrew tracked the chemical signatures of obsidian tools found throughout the Mediterranean. He discovered that thousands of years before the invention of the wheel, massive quantities of volcanic glass were being transported over hundreds of miles of open ocean. Prehistoric traders were charting dangerous waters on primitive rafts just to sell premium cutting edges to distant settlements. You are told that ancient humans only cared about basic survival needs like shelter and calories. But the data reveals a completely different story. Archaeologists digging in Central Europe discovered massive prehistoric storage pits filled with thousands of identical, highly polished jadeite axe heads. These axes were beautifully crafted, but they were made of a stone so fragile that they would shatter upon impacting a tree. They were never meant to chop wood or fight enemies. They were status symbols, stored in massive underground vaults like bars of gold in Fort Knox. The true value of an object is never found in its material or its physical utility. It is found in the human story connected to it. The prehistoric trader who held a piece of fragile jadeite knew that its worth didn't come from its ability to cut down a tree. It came from the shared agreement of 1,000 people who looked at that stone and saw beauty, effort, and trust. It was a physical manifestation of human cooperation, sculpted out of the raw earth. Consider what happens to human behavior when you create an object that stores value across time. It changes the way you perceive your entire existence. When your wealth is tied to fresh meat, you must consume it immediately before it rots. You live entirely in the present moment. But when you can convert your hunting success into a string of durable shell beads, you can suddenly save your labor for next winter. You can plan for future scarcity, pass wealth down to your children, and build a lasting legacy. Money did not emerge to solve the supposed inefficiency of barter. Money emerged to formalize and depersonalize a trust-based gift economy that was already working perfectly well on its own terms, once that economy grew too large and too anonymous for memory and reputation alone to track who owed what to whom. In other words, money was not invented because barter was broken. Money was invented because human memory does not scale. You can remember who you owe in a group of 50 people. You cannot remember who you owe in a group of 50,000. Money became the technology that allowed obligation to travel between strangers who would never personally know each other and never need to trust each other directly, because the coin, the token, the shell, did the trusting for them. This reframes something important about how you experience money today. Every time you tap a card or send a digital payment, you are using a tool invented specifically to let you transact with someone you do not know, will never know, and do not need to trust personally. That is an extraordinary technology. It is also, in a very real sense, a downgrade from what came before it. You might believe that you are completely different from those ancient humans sleeping around a campfire. You wear modern clothes, check stock tickers, and pay your bills with a plastic card. But your brain is identical to the brains of the traders who bartered for volcanic glass 10,000 years ago. When you buy a luxury watch, a designer handbag, or a rare digital collectible, you are doing the exact same thing as the prehistoric hunter wearing a necklace of rare animal teeth. You are displaying an expensive, hard-to-acquire signal of your status and reliability. We live in a world where we think we have mastered the art of value. We have created complex mathematical derivatives, algorithmic trading bots, and borderless digital currencies. Yet, if you strip away the glowing screens and the glass skyscrapers, the core agreement remains exactly the same as it was in the Stone Age. Money is not the paper in your wallet, nor is it the gold in a vault. Money is a collective story we tell ourselves to measure trust and coordinate human energy. When you look closely at the soil of our planet, you find that human history is quite literally paved with currency. From discarded clay tokens in ancient Sumeria to buried silver hoards in Viking fields, our ancestors left behind an endless trail of accounting. Every single civilization tried to find a permanent yardstick to freeze time and capture the value of human sweat. Every single civilization eventually failed, watching their currencies rust, decay, or inflate away into nothingness. So the next time you transfer money to a stranger online, or feel a strange emptiness after an expensive but impersonal purchase, you are experiencing the ghost of a 290,000-year-old economic system brushing up against a 5,000-year-old one. Money won the practical argument. It scaled. It crossed oceans. It allowed economies of billions of strangers. But something was traded away to get there. Reciprocity. Memory. The quiet social debt that once meant every transaction was also, secretly, a relationship. You spent 8 hours today trading your time for an abstract number. Your ancestors spent 8 hours hunting and gave away what they caught, creating something money still cannot quite replicate. A debt that was never really about the goods at all. It was about being remembered.